First and foremost, all praise to the Most High God, our Lord and Savior Yeshua, Jesus Christ, our King forever and ever. Welcome back, YouTube, to another episode of Odd Topic. Now, the first Invisible Enemy video was blocked, hence the take 2. Have you ever thought outside of the box? The actual box. The 3D perception that has been given to you. Yes, given, because things weren't always like this. Something or things have hidden themselves through agents. Let's dig in. So, an unseen enemy in an unseen world. First, let's take a look at who this unseen enemy is.
So we've been learning about spiritual beings in the Bible, and I still have a lot of questions about the bad ones.
Well, great. Let's talk about the Satan and demons in the story of the Bible. So let's start in the beginning. In Genesis 1, God creates a beautiful, ordered reality out of darkness and disorder so that life can flourish. He appoints humans as his representatives to rule over all of it, and 7 times God calls it good.
Yeah, I experience that kind of goodness often in the world, in things like beauty and truth, love and generosity.
But in Genesis 3, we meet a creature who's in a state of rebellion against his creator. We're not told yet why or how he rebels, but he's on a mission to ruin God's good world for other creatures.
This thing is trouble.
Yeah, this creature is the Bible's first portrait of evil. It distorts what God has purposed for good, ruining and dragging creation back into darkness and disorder.
So the humans join the spiritual rebel, which leads them back into chaos and death.
And from this point on, the human rebellion is interwoven with a spiritual rebellion. And the biblical story shows how this happens over and over again.
Okay, but wait, we're getting all this from a slithering snake?
Well, there are clues in the story that it's more than just a snake. Remember, Eden is a high place where the earth and its creatures overlap with heaven and its creatures.
So this snake could be a spiritual being.
Well, Genesis 3 points in that direction, and then later biblical authors fill in the picture. Like when the prophet Isaiah has a vision of God's heavenly throne room, he's surrounded and being praised by the spiritual beings.
Yeah, these are the cherubim around God's throne.
But when Isaiah sees these creatures, he describes them as seraphim, which in Hebrew means snake.
So the snake is like a former staff member in God's throne room. So why is he talking to the humans?
Well, the prophet Ezekiel understood this figure as a spiritual rebel who didn't want to live under God's wisdom and authority. He wanted to be God.
All right, that's the same temptation the snake puts before Adam and Eve.
Exactly. He says they could rule the world like God, but by their own wisdom.
So they're all kicked out of the garden.
Yeah, God says this rebel will now crawl on its belly.
Where does it go after this?
Well, the biblical authors offer subtle clues where this being is at work behind the scenes, animating division and hatred between humans. They also use a variety of images to describe this being. It's a snake, or a sea dragon, or a dark desert creature, or the king of death in the grave. He's also given many titles, like Tempter, or the Evil One, or the Devil, which in Greek means the slanderer.
But his name is Satan, right?
Actually, no. Satan is not a name. It's another one of these titles, which is why in Hebrew it has the word the in front of it. The Satan means the adversary, because he isn't for anything, rather he's anti-everything, working through lies to drag us back into darkness and disorder.
That's intense. Now, what about these other spiritual rebels in the Bible called demons? What are they all about?
Okay, so remember the concept of God's heavenly staff team, the divine council, or the sons of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're told that some of these rebelled too.
When did that happen?
Multiple times, actually. After the snake comes the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. We're told that they have sex with women who then give birth to violent warrior giants.
Oh, right. The Nephilim. These are probably the strangest characters in the whole Bible.
Well, strange from your point of view, but ancient readers knew exactly what was going on. The ancient kingdoms around Israel claimed to be founded and protected by giant warrior kings who were part human, part god, and filled with divine wisdom.
Ah, I see. So the biblical authors are saying, hey, those warrior kings, they shouldn't be honored.
Right. In this story, they're portrayed as human rebels who are captive to spiritual evil, spreading their violence in God's good world.
Yeah, and one of those kings in Genesis 10 goes on to build the city of Babylon.
Yes, Nimrod, whose name sounds like the Hebrew word for rebel. And his kingdom leads to the next rebellion, where humans exalt themselves in Babylon.
But God scatters that rebellion.
And when Moses in Deuteronomy looks back at that story, he says that's the moment when God handed over the nations to worship the rebel host of heaven, the gods of money, sex, and military power. Moses is the first one to call them demons, that is, lesser spiritual beings.
So demons are spiritual forces at work behind corrupt human power structures.
Yes, but in the Bible, they also work on the personal level, animating and exploiting humanity's greed and selfishness, as well as the weakness of our mortal bodies. In the Bible, spiritual evil is at work in anything that drags God's good creation back into chaos, darkness, and death.
So this is why when Jesus arrives on the scene, he said his primary enemy is not human.
Right. Jesus and his first followers viewed all the pain and suffering in God's good world as a sign of its captivity to death and spiritual evil.
But they didn't think this was the end of the story.
Right. Jesus knew that the only way out of this cosmic ruin is to overcome evil and death itself, even if it costs him everything.
Demons are earthbound. They crave a human body through which they manifest their evil purposes. A spirit of lying has to have a human mouth with which to lie. A spirit of gossip, which is character assassination, needs a human mouth to do that. The spirit of anger, the spirit of jealousy, the spirit of murder, all of those need the human body to manifest their evil propensity. Here's the serious point. Whatever Satan controls, he will destroy.
Where's this lack in understanding this enemy today coming from? There's a documentary titled History of the 19th Century. In the first minute of this film, a quote stood out to me. Early civilizations attributed mood, thought, and behavioral differences to spirits, gods, and demons. 18th century views were more humanistic and took into account the physical structure of the brain. Before psychiatry became a medical specialty, general physicians treated mental illness. Now, for some reason in the 18th century, it was blurred how Jesus dealt with the demons in people. Thinking how it went from casting out demons to modern day taking medications brought to my attention something not officially known as, but mentioned as a brain renaissance.
That's the theory presented in the paper Brain Imaging in the Renaissance, written by Alessandro Paluzzi, Antonio Belli, Peter Bain, and Lara Viva, and published in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine.
It was the Renaissance, after all, a period of artistic and scientific rebirth. Suddenly, old religious and philosophical notions about the nature of reality weren't so set in stone. New ideas caught fire throughout the Western world, and this new spirit of curiosity inevitably led great thinkers of the day to the human brain.
Those thinkers included natural philosophers, surgeons, and even artists. For instance, in the early 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci conducted experiments to reveal the anatomy of the ventricular system in the brain.
These experiments involved hot wax and a dead ox, just another day in the artist's studio, but it pushed Leonardo toward the existing Christian belief that the ventricles were the abode of the rational soul.
Sure, that's not quite what modern neuroscience tells us, but certainly the notion of the soul and the experience of the mind resides in the organic brain.
And so just look at the images of the divine and 3 works of Renaissance art.
A brain renaissance. Now, earlier in that quote, it said humanistic view. So, moving to a more humanistic view brings to mind humanism. Humanism, an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural. Well, we're on the right track. Now, recall that video we did on the avant-garde. Avant-garde. New and unusual or experimental ideas, especially in the arts or the people introducing them. To sum it up, They pushed boundaries such as what was accepted in society, mainly focused on the cultural realm. Because changing a culture can change one's belief.
So for commercial forces or anyway, having budgets to change your culture, having a strategy to change your culture, when it is so, I think you should also have a strategy not to allow that to happen. How it is done is a questionable thing. In some form of education, some way it must be done. It's very easy to sell sleaze, you understand? And very easily you can catch the youth and make that the culture of the land in no time. I want you to understand this culture was engineered to gradually lead people towards their spiritual process.
A changing of the people using culture tactics circles right back around to humanism, the humanism renaissance. Now, this painting was done by Michelangelo, ceiling of what's known as the Sistine Chapel in 1512, just before the Protestant Reformation. Look at the pic. Is there anything hidden in this pic?
The secret diagram. Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam is one of the most iconic images in human history, depicting the book of Genesis scene where God breathed life into Adam through his fingers, obviously, because a painting of the Lord Almighty going mouth to mouth with Adam may have been a little risque for the walls of the Sistine Chapel. But in 1990, an American physician, Dr. Frank Meshberger, noticed something familiar about the area surrounding God. What is that weird shape that the Lord seems to be crowd surfing out from? Meshberger noticed that the border of the area behind God corresponds precisely with a side profile cross-section of the human brain. Here's the pituitary gland, the frontal lobe, the vertebral artery, the spinal cord, the pons, the sylvan fissure, and the brainstem. And if you need further evidence, then consider the fact that age 17, Michelangelo was a passionate anatomy student who dissected corpses from his local church graveyard to study.
The Sistine Chapel was completed by Pope Sixtus IV, who was a successor to Pope Nicholas V. Now, Pope Nicholas V actually wanted a new Rome. He wanted to attract pilgrims and scholars to make a public or institution for humanist scholarship to transform Rome. Institution for humanist scholarship to transform Rome. That institution, that library is the Vatican Library. But see, there's that humanism again. So, Catholic humanism?
Message! What we need, critics say, is humanism, which elevates man and affirms his greatness. But here's the thing. Catholicism, not science, not atheism, not secularism, offers the greatest humanism possible.
Did it transition to today?
Catholic Church built Western civilization. Now, this doesn't mean our culture derives entirely from Catholicism, but the Church's contributions are massive, more than any other source. From music to art to architecture, from science to law to economics to morality, many of the foundations that we take for granted today are deeply rooted in Catholicism.
I know you're wondering, what does any of this have to do with evil spirits? See, changing culture causes one's way of thinking to change, which is actually messing with one's psyche. Psyche, the human soul, mind, or spirit. The human soul, mind, or spirit. It's messing with the soul. And earlier in that title, which I know I forgot to mention the psychiatry part, but the history of psychiatry in the 19th century. So the Renaissance shifted the boundaries of the brain. And when you think of the psyche, psychiatry comes to mind. Well, is this all connected?
Yes. Think about this question. If a complete psychological, if a psychology of religion were completely successful, if an evolutionary explanation combined with a neuroscientific perspective of what's going on in the brain when people are having spiritual experiences, cognitive explanations, social cultural influences in terms of how you've been shaped by your environment, if All these things together successfully and completely explain why one person is religious and another person is not, for example. Does that explain away the authenticity of their religious faith?
They're explaining away the spirit world. Go way back. That's the enemy's tactic. The serpent got Eve to think a different way. He changed her perception of what God said. It got her thinking differently. It psyched her. In Matthew, it warns us not to listen to the vain babblings of science. This is science. The Big Bang Theory, evolution, this is all an attempt to give a different perception or a logical explanation, which is what these philosophers who brought on all these different renaissances were doing. That's an attempt to explain away the source. Psychology is born of philosophy. A quote right off of psychologyinstructor.com. See, when you look at these two, philosophy sets out to solve problems occurring in reality, which leaves no room for a spiritual matter. So if you have no knowledge of evil spirits causing these issues, then psychology can slip right in and say, hey, all these spiritual things are actually just chemical imbalances, so let's prescribe you something.
Over 40 years ago, leading psychiatrists met in Puerto Rico to map out their vision of the future.
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
Their plan? To create by the year 2000 a range of psychiatric drugs regulating every aspect of human behavior.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
You know, it's rather strange that psychology means the study of the soul, but a pill is prescribed to heal a spiritual matter? That just doesn't make sense. Something isn't adding up, unless this medicine is aimed at the spirit.
This is how the devil does. He doesn't call witchcraft anymore. It's called parapsychology. It's called scientific research. It's called spiritism and spiritualism.
So vita-kinesis represents the manipulation of healing. That doesn't come from God, it comes from hell. From Lucifer, L, Satan, S, devil, D, there's your LSD. In Ezekiel 28:13, the first stones upon the breastplate of Tyrus, Tylenol, pharmaceutical, pharmakia, witchcraft, was sardis, S, topaz, T, diamond, D, STD, sexually transmitted diseases. Another topic for another day.
In carefully controlled experiments, interesting results have been reported on the therapeutic use of LSD with the mentally ill, the drug addict, the terminal cancer patient. And in the VA hospital in Topeka, Kansas, a special research program for alcoholics.
Well, this program was started in January of this year, where we began treating 5 patients for 26 days. We bring them in on one Monday, and they spend 1 week of getting acquainted and having all the tests and examinations done to keep them busy for the whole week, day and night practically. The second Monday, we give them a small dose of LSD in the 5-man ward together. This is to help the group pull together, and in their group experience during this 26 days to also get some good from this. Then the third Monday, we give them a larger dose individually and have each one of them cared for by one of these teams who have associated with them, and they give them their complete support. And This is where we aim for the so-called psychedelic experience. In this program, we bring these men back every 4 months for 3 days. And this follow-up is quite important. The thing that affected me as far as the first patient is concerned was the openness which he talked with me. The quality also seemed to be more realistic than he has shown before.
Qualities in my head, the good qualities, of course, virtue, love, trust. And then I seen the other ones, hate, anger, distrust. I seen them all in my head, and it was like I was strangling myself, like I had to get rid of all the bad qualities, and I was strangling myself fighting against them.
I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
General anxiety disorder, prescribed Zoloft.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
Then they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Sibtamu,
Tegretol,
Lexapro, Depakote,
Stelazine,
Adderall,
Concerta,
Orazine, Prozac,
Lorazepam,
Effexor,
Clonazepam, Ritalin,
Dexamphetamine,
Paxil,
Silert,
Prozac,
Adderall,
Elavil,
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
What was it with Adam and Eve that separated, that caused the downfall, that caused everything? It was beyond everything, before their disobedience, it was their lack of faith in God. God gave them a word, they doubted that word. The enemy wants to make you lose your faith in God.
Ladies and gentlemen, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. What's going in your ears all day? Well, what does the world look like? Television. It looks like television. Media puts on an image and people eat it up.
But as a child, you are trained through media, music, movies. Everything is programming. I was telling my wife today about programming. Even watch this cartoon stuff. This stuff is the evil. This stuff is more evil than it is evil than some of the movies. It is evil what they program these children with. Because really what they're doing with children is programming them to believe in spirits in a good way. That's what they're doing to children. That's why all these cartoons now look floating demon, look devil looking stuff. We don't like to believe that our children are under demonic attack. For some reason, we like to explain it away. I talk to my wife a lot about it, about how sometimes Satan has trained us through education, science, and all that to explain away demonic activity. We explain it away so we don't have to deal with it. Once we say, oh, y'all, that's just ADHD. Now we've explained it away, so now we can, what does that mean? Well, there's a system set up for it. Let's get some pills, let's get them on some medication. We've explained away this behavior. You hear what I'm saying?
Topic. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, baby.